Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique swinging pendulum and how to relate it to other techniques in the American Kenpo system. So keep in mind two things. First, this is not considered a comprehensive list of relationships. And two, it's not family groupings. What it is just different avenues that you can explore to relate this technique to other techniques of the system. So let's start out with a concept that's used in swinging pendulum, up the circle. So in order to get into what it is and how it works, watch one of our other videos. What we're going to do here is just use it as a base to draw some relationships. So what are we doing in swinging pendulum? What we're doing is we're using that up the circle to get out of the way and then drawing into a backup mass position by using a lined hammer fist to the groin. So let's take a relationship with that, change the idea just a little bit by using up the circle and attacking almost simultaneously with one another, but then using our foot rather than our hand. That would bring us something like a deceptive panther. Okay, so let's go back up to the top again, similar to what we're doing in swinging pendulum with the hand. Instead of doing it on the low zone, let's move it to the high zone and still now do a complete evasion and attack at the exact same time with the hand. That brings us something like the detour can do. Okay, so the elements of the up the circle at this point have been pretty much on that center line using minimal depth zones. Let's do the opposite of that. Bring it back to the hands, and rather than going on lines, if you've noticed up to now we've been always going lines, let's change it to a circle and turn it. And if we do that, that turns it into something like a reversing mace. We're moving up that circle using a circle now on a horizontal, very similar to what we're doing on the horizontals here, but now rather than doing it on the center line, we're doing it to the obscure zones, just like we're doing at the end of swinging pendulum, where we take advantage of the obscure zones. So let's move on to a different concept, evasion. If you look at swinging pendulum uses that up the circle, but it uses it primarily for evasion, but it's doing it against the foot. We could also do it off the opposite end of the body, which would be the hand. And a perfect example of a technique that does that is something like a circling horizon. The key here to note is just like swinging pendulum, we're really not blocking. If you look at swinging pendulum, all we're doing is doing these checks throughout the technique. If we do it off the circling horizon, you notice the exact same thing. The left is not blocking. All it is checking so that we can get to the outside and take advantage of the obscure zone. Again, very similar to what we're doing at the end of swinging pendulum. Now, two other examples that we have right off the bat are two techniques that are using a man-made weapon rather than a natural weapon. Things like checking the storm, which is very similar to what we're doing in swinging pendulum. If you notice, the only difference is the feet are switched. We're doing a variation on the universal block to do this covering rather than blocking. And then, just like bringing in reversing mace, what we can do is to the outside rather than to the center line. And again, not blocking. And this brings us something like evading the storm. So let's reverse the concept. Up to now, we've been using an evasion. We can do the opposite concept of evasion, which is called jamming. And we have some prime examples with the stick again that do that same thing. First, calming the storm, or if we switch our feet, we call that securing the storm. But notice these are coming on the horizontal. We can do the exact same thing on the vertical, and that gives us something like an obstructing storm. So up to now, we've been using it with the upper body and the lower body, but we can also do the opposite side on that lower body and do this exact same concept of jamming, but doing it against the left leg rather than the right leg, and that gives us something like a reversing circles. And one final thing that we can talk about is we can combine the two ideas of both evasion and jamming at the same time, and that would bring us something very simple like a triggered salute, where we're moving our body out of the way and we're hitting them simultaneously. So if you think about it, we have both the jamming and the evasion at the exact same time. So that brings us into our recap where we're talking about evasion and how we can deal with those attacks, or up the circle and using it for evasion yet another way, and then using it with different elements of lines and circles. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.